I'm in the process of testing and repairing a number of tape drives for the HP9845B vintage computer that I'm working on. So far I've been through the tape drive mechanics. I've repaired the capstans on them all, shortened the spacers on the couple so they will fit into a 9845, and just done some basic checks to make sure that mechanically they seem to be sound. So I've now got to the point where I need to test a couple of TACO boards. So these TACO boards are not the ones out of my machine. So I've got two of these to test. So far what I've done is I attached just the TACO board without the tape drive connected. I powered up the HP just to make sure that the TACO board wasn't preventing the HP from booting up, which is one of the faults I had with one of the TACO boards out of the machine. It booted up fine, so I didn't bother showing that on camera. And what we're going to do now is test each of the tape drives. So I've got the first one connected, as you can see. I've got a DC 2120 tape. This does have some programs on it, so I'm going to put this into the tape drive once we've powered the machine up, and then try and read the tape and see if we have any faults. As I said, both of my TACO boards had faults. And if you're not familiar with these machines, the TACO board provides a fairly simple interface for the HP9845 to access the tape drives. So the hybrid module, which is under this central heatsink, it provides functions such as motor speed control, the threshold setting for the tape data sensing, and then the general interface control to make sure the tape's there, that sort of thing. And it also provides the drive to drive the motor at various speeds in both directions, and that's controlled through these two power devices. And what I'll do, as I say, I'll get it powered up, put the tape in, and we'll see what this particular tape drive will do. And also what the TACO does. Neither one of these have been tested yet, other than just allowing the machine to power up with the TACO board connected, but I don't know if the TACO board has any faults, and I don't know if the tape drive has any faults, so we'll get it powered up, see what happens. So I've got the HP powered up. I'm just waiting for the screen to warm up, and I've got the startup prompt, just says 9845B ready for use, with the flashing cursor. We can see that the two bulbs on the tape drive have lit up. So what I'm going to do now is install the tape itself, and we'll now try to read that. So I'm going to just try and read the catalogue for that particular tape. I'll hit execute. Okay, just move the camera. So hopefully you can see that particular tape drive does seem to be working, and also the TACO board seems to be working. So not as interesting as I was hoping, but what I will do now is run a few checks on this TACO board to make sure that all the functions work, and if I find any faults I will get back on camera. Okay, I ran a series of checks on this tape drive and on the TACO board, and this seems to be working fine. What I'm going to do now is swap the tape drive for one of the other tape drives, power it back up, and we'll see if that particular tape drive works as well. I've got the second tape drive connected. We'll get the tape installed, and we'll try reading the catalogue for this tape. Okay, well, unfortunately that one is also working. So I'll swap this drive with the next one, and we'll see if that works. I'm going to run a series of tests off camera before I do that, but fundamentally we'll get the next tape drive installed and see if that one's working. I've got the third tape drive plugged in. first two work fine. The other tests I carried out on the second drive all passed. That's working fine. This tape drive, incidentally, is the one out of the 9835A, and I believe the tape drives are identical. I have modified this to accept the DC 2000 style case tapes, but I've left the spacers the full height, and that should work fine in the 9835. So we'll get this installed and see what it does. Okay, I'm getting an error 81. So either this is a case of the tape drive is different, or the tape drive has an error. So I'm going to look into this a bit more carefully and see exactly what may be causing this. It may be something simple, but it could well be that this tape drive is just simply not compatible with the 9845. Well, the tape drive out of the 9835A definitely had a fault, and because I don't have a 9835A to test the drive on, there are some component differences, mostly to adjust gains and offsets for certain parts of the circuit. It's not always that clear as to whether the issue was just a gain or offset or level issue. And I don't have a full set of schematics for the 9835A, so what I did is started probing around the circuit, and the observant of you will already have seen that I've replaced the part, and that's this device here. And what this is responsible for is controlling these FET gates, and these are what switch between reading and writing the tape, so they either connect the drive signals from the drive circuit through to the read-write head, or they connect the read-write head through to the sense amplifier. And so I've replaced that, and what I found was this runs at a bit of an odd voltage. It's got about 20 volts on the supply pin, and it's switched through TTL levels. But what it does is it drives the little row of FETs here to make them act as switches. And I noticed that pins 1 and 2, which were two of the control pins, were permanently at 20 volts, so they were always high, even when the drive was idle, and they should normally be low, and that was the first pins that I tried, so pins 1 and 2. That's why I didn't video it. Really wasn't a very interesting repair. So as soon as I looked at pins 1 and 2, realised they were high, and the actual drive coming in, there are three multiplexed lines in effect that select the output levels on the output pins, and they were all correct at what they should be. So it wasn't an interface issue or a change or difference in the way that the drive is controlled. It was actually a faulty device. So pop the old one out, put a socket in place. I always put sockets in when I can, and I can now retest the drive. I've written a small program on the 9845, so I don't have to keep typing in the cat command. Not very long, but if you're doing testing, it's just easiest to write a program. So we'll run that and see what happens. And you can probably tell by the noise it's made, it is actually working. So we'll just rerun, make sure that the 9845 is doing what it should be. Let's move the camera so you can see the output. And as you can see, the drive now works. So we now have three of the drives repaired. So that's the pair for the 9845. Let's adjust the camera there. The drive for the 9835A is now working, and again I'll run through some full tests for this. I'm sure you'll all be interested to see what will happen with the fourth drive. Now, if you recall, this drive, the one to the 9835A, didn't have an encoder disc. So when I rebuilt these, because these three drives, the two for the 9845 and this one are not mine, this one is a spare one I'm keeping to make up a test jig, but I don't currently have an encoder disc for this because I swapped it and put it into the one that was missing. So this is now working, we're getting proper encoder output, but I thought I'd plug this one in for anyone that's interested to see what happens. Now in theory we should get a servo error because although the motor will be turning, the TACO board won't see the output because there's no encoder disc, and it will interpret that as meaning the drive isn't rotating. So I'll get it plugged in and we'll see what happens. I've got the drive plugged in, I've rebooted the HP, so we'll try reading the tape and we'll see what happens. And sure enough, we've got a drive failure. We heard it turn briefly, but it wasn't seeing the encoder output, so it's immediately stopped. I don't know how long it runs for, it's only a few milliseconds, and it's just looking for the first output from the encoder. Didn't see it, so it called a halt and it stopped the motor. I don't know if this drive works other than that, but it's quite a good sign that it did what it did, because it does at least mean that the servo works. The output from the encoder in theory should be working, and it should be relatively easy to repair once I find an encoder disc. So I might have to get inventive with that. They're obviously not available anymore, but that might be an interesting repair video on its own. So next step, I'll get one of the working drives plugged back in, and we'll move on to the second of our TACO boards and see if this works. Been a bit boring at the moment, so I had one minor fault. I was expecting a lot more faults than this based on what I found with the original machine, but maybe the second TACO board will give us something more interesting to look at. So I'll get that plugged in and we'll see what we find. I've got the second TACO board hooked up. I've got the tape drive off the 9835A plugged in, that's the one we've just repaired. And I've got a program entered into the 9845 to read the catalogue from the tape, so we'll try and running that and see what happens. Okay, well, I'm getting an error 85, which means it's not properly communicating with the tape drive system. We know the tape drive works, so the only thing that's left now is the TACO board. So we'll start doing some basic testing. The faults I had on the other one were both had faulty comparators, so we'll start with that. We'll look at pin 9 and see if we are getting any data. Try running the program, and we are seeing data there. So next thing is we'll see if the data is making it through this buffer chip to the flip-flop. So we want to look at pin 3 of U17. U17 is this one. And the program again, and we are getting data through there. The other issue we had on one of the other TACO boards was we had a failed transistor here, and this is really the output of the level shifter. So this goes through, ends up at pins 1 and 2 of U17. So we'll monitor pin 1, run our program again, and that's working, so we're getting data through there. So as we work our way from left to right here, we're heading towards the TACO controller itself, the hybrid, and it looks like we may have an issue with the interface on this one. So I'll get the part of the schematic for the interface and we'll start investigating that. I was about to start investigating the circuits that sit between the TACO controller and the HP9845, so these buffers here. I've had problems with some of these on one of my own boards, but then I noticed something that I'm going to try and demonstrate. And the reason I noticed this is because over the last few months I have spent quite considerable time trying to get data out of a large number of DC100 tapes, and you kind of get familiar with the way the system behaves. It's slightly different here because obviously I have been using the drives in the machine itself, and they do sound slightly different. The camera seems to pick up the noise of the tape drive far more than it's actually evident in real life, but I'll try and demonstrate what's going on here. So I'm going to try to read the catalogue in this tape, and this is the faulty TACO board. And if you try and pay attention to the noise that the tape drive makes, so I'll run this now. Okay, so I'll try that one more time. I'm getting error 85. Now error 85 means, or it's declared as meaning that the tape is not formatted. Now this tape is formatted, but that error tends to come up whenever the system can't reliably read data from the tape, which can be many things on the board. So run this again, and again try to listen to the noise that the drive makes. Okay. So what I'll do now is I'll swap the TACO board for the working TACO board, and hopefully be able to see the difference. So this is the same drive, the same tape. The tape's in the same position we left it from the test we just carried out, but I've got the working TACO board connected. So if we try to run this, and again try and observe the tape, and more specifically see if you can listen to the difference in the sound that it makes. Okay, so that's successfully read the tape. I've got the data, or at least the catalogue information on the screen of the HP. But you probably noticed it makes a different sound, and that's due to the speed it was running. So I'm starting to suspect that the problem here is that with the non-working TACO board, it's not properly controlling the speed. Now it can control the direction. We noticed it turned in both directions. So what I'm going to do here is try running the test program. I've got a test ROM for the HP, and we'll start off with the working drive, or the working TACO. So I'm going to reboot the HP9845, and I'm going to insert the test ROM. So I've got the test ROM plugged into the 9845. I'm going to skip through the memory check, and then I'm going to select the tape drive test. Okay, so what I can do now is try driving the tape drive. Now, one of the clever things with the keys on the 9845 is not only can the system sense when you press a key, it can sense how far down you press the key. So what we can do now is use the arrow keys to drive the tape back and forth. And if I press the arrow key, the right arrow key, for example, halfway down, the tape should start running forward slowly. If I press the key all the way down, it should run fast. So I'm going to press it just halfway down and try and get the tape to run forward slowly. Remember, this is the working TACO board. So I'll select the test. This is the M test from the test ROM, and I'm going to press the right arrow key just halfway down. I don't want to drive the tape too far, but if you watch how fast and listen to how fast the tape is spinning, it's going quite slowly. Okay, and the same the other way. So notice that the tape is spinning fairly slowly. It's going at its slow speed. It really runs at two fundamental speeds. So this is the tape running at slow speed. What I'm going to do now is swap the TACO board with the faulty one. So I've got the faulty TACO board plugged in, same tape, and I've got the test program lined up. So I'll try pressing the key halfway down. Tape runs at its low speed. I'll try going the other way, and again the tape runs at low speed. So the board is capable of correctly driving the tape at the right speed. It just isn't driving it at the right speed when we try to read the catalogue from the tape. So something very strange going on with this particular interface. What I'm going to do next is try swapping the tape drive. Remember, this is the drive out of the 9835a, so I'm going to try one of the 9845B drives and see if that makes any difference. Okay, so this is the faulty TACO board, and I've got the one of the tape drives out of the 9845 connected, and I've got the HP powered up. And so what we'll try doing now is reading the tape and see what happens. So I'll execute that, and if I just move the camera, as you can see, it is now working. So looking at the resistor values on the 9835A drive, there are a number of differences, and in particular these resistors here are different values, and they are in the part of the circuit that handles the sensing of the encoder. So it looks like what's going on here is the level output for the encoder signal that's being fed into the TACO board. Let's get the part of the schematic where that comes in. So looking at the schematic, we're looking at this part of the circuit here. It looks like there's a minor difference between the two TACO boards, where one is a bit more forgiving. It looks like the output of the TACO signal on the 9835A is a bit lower than that on the 9845. And for one of the TACO boards it was fine, it managed to accept it, but this particular TACO board, the gain of this amplifier seems to be a bit lower. I did try putting a scope on here, and the TACO signal is there, but it's a bit intermittent with the TACO board that's not working, and that's what's causing the tape drive to run faster. I don't want to keep demonstrating this because it stresses the tape, and I don't really want to damage this tape. But looking at it, what I found was that on the non-working board it was making the tape basically run at full speed because it couldn't properly and reliably see the TACO signal coming out of the tape drive, whereas the higher level signal coming out of the proper 9845 was sufficient to correctly drive the TACO input to the TACO hybrid, and it could reliably see the signal. So a bit of an odd one there. Looks like we didn't have a fault after all, and it was just caused by a slight mismatch for the tape drive. So something worth bearing in mind there. If you pick one of these drives up, make sure that it is correctly configured for the particular machine that you're using. In particular, look at the values in the tape drive for the optical encoder. A bit suspicious that there wasn't an encoder disc in this in the first place, and of course you will also find minor differences as the encoder disc gets older, where the markings on it tend to fade slightly. You might get a problem there. But interesting fault, at least I thought so. But now it looks like these are working. I'm going to go through and test all these drives more thoroughly and make sure they're reliable. And I've also fitted the small sockets on the back for the resistor, so that the drive for the writing current can be modified if required for the DC 2000 tapes. So not many faults in this, unfortunately. Not quite as interesting as I'd hoped. It turned out we didn't have any faults really on the TACO boards, so completely the opposite of the ones I had, and we had the single fault on one of the tape drives. But it's quite a lot of work to go through and get these up to this point where they are now all working, but quite an interesting job. In the next video we'll move on to the next spares that I have for the 9845, and we'll start working on those, and it'd be nice to get onto something different from tape drives.